Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, and thank you for joining us. Our topic today is how to improve forecast accuracy. I'm Kristen Tiley, the Director of Marketing at Arkiva, and I'm your moderator today. Discussing today's topic will be Sujit Singh, COO here at Arkiva. Sujit, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning, Kristen. Great to be with you. Yeah, I've been working on these topics for a long time, helping companies improve their forecast accuracy in a variety of businesses, and I'm happy to talk about it today.
Great, thank you. We do have a few announcements before we begin. If at any point you have trouble hearing us, you can let us know using the chat feature and we'll be sure to assist you. We do have a couple polling questions in today's session, so we encourage you to respond when those come up. And there will be time at the end of the session for questions. You may submit an online question at any point using the questions window. Now, before I hand things over to Sujit, I'd like to share a little bit about Arkiva. For more than 30 years, Arkiva has helped global enterprises drive business transformation through improved supply chain processes. We're recognized by Gartner in the Gartner Supply Chain Planning Solutions Magic Quadrant. Everything we do is aimed at solving complex planning challenges and creating cutting-edge technology that enables you to run your business at peak performance. We continually challenge ourselves to create solutions that not only solve today's challenges, but future challenges as well. We live in a dynamic world where speed, accuracy, and efficiency are critical to drive business transformation, and we believe that starts with better planning. Our goal is to enable your business to benefit and thrive from the way our solutions unlock the true value of your supply chain. Our fully integrated IBP solution is a demand-driven business planning process that promotes cross-functional synchronization within the company, starting from integrated financial planning to demand and inventory management, to create a more dynamic IBP management process using real-time dashboards. And with that introduction, I'll hand things over to Sujit.
Thank you, Kristen. All right, so as we jump in, let's look at the agenda. What I'd like to talk about today is maybe kind of frame the discussion with why companies need to forecast in the first place, although I'm sure with the audience we have, they already know this. Introduce the concept of forecast value add, and then get into the meat of the presentation about things that can help improve the accuracy, things like data cleanup, things like a machine or computer-based forecast, collaborative or human forecast, and then we'll summarize the learnings. Okay, so let's first talk about why companies need to forecast. Now, don't take my word for it. People like Gartner and AMR have done a lot of research, and here are two results from such research. So one research from AMR pointed out that companies that are the best at demand forecasting, they have a lot less inventory, about 15%, which is significant. They do have a lot higher perfect order fulfillment to the tune of 17%. They do have a much shorter cash-to-cash cycle time, 35%, and then they see a tenth of the number of stockouts from their peers. Those are some significant benefits. Now, a different study, again in a different point in time from AMR, pointed out that a % improvement in forecast accuracy can yield 2% improvement in perfect order fulfillment, and 3% increase in forecast accuracy can increase the profit margin by 2%. Now, one thing I want to point out, and I'll actually have a disclaimer about this later, is that each time you do a study like this, depending on who you reach to and depending on their own life cycle, the answer that you will get back is going to be different. So a 1% forecast accuracy will not always lead to 2% improvement in perfect order fulfillment. This is because forecasting fundamentally is data-based. And so one has to always keep that in mind, that these are directionally correct, but you will not obviously see exactly the same results in your business. So why is that? Why does forecast help? Well, if one has forecast error, there are some consequences. And if we divide that into two distinct parts, one part is over forecast, the idea being that we are forecasting more than what actually happens. Well, if we do that, now we will have all of a sudden too much product and we will have to get rid of it. And how do you get rid of it? Well, sometimes you have to sell it at discount. So whenever you sell it at discount, now you're not retrieving as much of a margin on it as you would have uh, achieved earlier. So that's a little bit of a loss. Sometimes you may have to ship it from one location to another because you have too much product here in one location, but some other location might not have enough, so you may want to move it. Sometimes the product might simply go bad, especially if you have a short life cycle product. So you over forecast, you make too much or you buy too much, as the case might be, and then the product just goes obsolete, uh, which can have the sense of spoiling if it's a short life cycle product, but it could also be obsolete in the sense that the trend itself has passed away. Maybe you are in the toy business, you buy a particular kind of toy for the year end Christmas season, and that for whatever reason that the excitement in the market disappears, and now you have too much product that you don't know where to push. Of course, if you have over forecast, you're going to carry the inventory, and whenever you carry extra inventory, you will have extra inventory carrying costs. So those are the implications on the over forecasting side. If, on the other hand, you have under forecasting, meaning you're forecasting less than what you sell, then you will lose out on some sales. Some customers will not get the product because you simply won't have it. Sometimes you will lose out on companion sales. What is that? Well, someone walks into the store wanting items A, B, and C. You do not have the item A. Well, they walk out, and then you lose the sale of items B and C as well. Now, all of this could certainly be very localized, but it can also, if it happens very often, can lead to market share, especially if the word gets out. And then, no company will just sit there looking at a lost sale or customers being unhappy. So then they will react, and when they react, they will break into their schedule, make production that is less than optimal, and therefore they will be increasing production costs. And of course, they will then see if they can move product from here to there. Sometimes they'll put them on the faster mode of shipment, and so there will be an increase in shipment costs as well. So both over and under forecast will have significant impact. Now, most companies will have both these cases. Probably every product is in one of the two categories. One thing to keep in mind is if you're close enough, you're close enough. I mean, forecasting is not an exact science. So if your forecast is within plus or minus 2, 3, maybe 5%, I wouldn't necessarily count that too much towards over or under forecast. I'm talking about significant deviations, and that's what I would count towards over or under. Depending on the company, easily about 30% of the combinations might fall into one of the two. And I have seen companies where 70% of the combinations will fall under over or under forecast. So that means that about 30% in that second example would be close enough, and we would not count it as over or under. Okay. So now that we have established some needs for why companies need to forecast, now let's put a disclaimer. Everything I'm going to present today, I'll say you can get X% improvement here by doing this or doing that. But ultimately, forecasting is data-driven. Any percent improvement in one business may not show up in the other business. The final accuracy, all of that is data-driven, cannot be guaranteed. And what you will achieve in your business will be very different from what someone else achieves in their business by doing the same exact steps. So just please keep that in mind. Now, having put the disclaimer out, also let's say that the accuracy improvement is so important, the gains are so high that we cannot just give up just because it's data-driven. We must try to improve. All right. So now let's begin to take our journey through the steps needed. And the very first step in improving the demand forecast is understanding your customer demand. And when we say understanding the demand, typically it entails listening to the customer, of course, trying to understand what are the key drivers that actually generate the demand for your business, but also it entails analyzing your demand data. Some examples of analytics could be ABC analysis or coefficient of variation or bumpiness which is the idea that how does it change from period to period, or lumpiness, which is a measure of does the demand come very concentrated or does it come more spread out. Now, this is a very important topic, and I will not be able to do justice to this topic in this webinar. In fact, I have done another webinar called How Forecastable is Your Data? And you may want to watch that webinar. So up on the screen, we have the QR code for that webinar. You may feel free to watch that webinar and learn more about how to run these analysis with your data. Okay. So it's very important to understand the demand itself. And now what I'm going to do is talk us through the idea of forecast value add, the concept, or sometimes which is abbreviated as FVA. Now this was introduced to the demand planning community by Michael Gilliland. So we thank him for this nice concept. So what's the idea? The idea is very simple. Michael pointed out that if you are going through a process of forecasting, and let's say there are multiple steps, then one way to make sure you are actually making a dent is to make sure that every step is adding some value. So for example, if you don't do any forecast at all, then comparing that to doing some forecast, putting some number of hours, while doing the forecast then should have some value over not doing the forecast. Similarly, if you buy a system to do statistical forecast, well, it should have some extra value on top of naive methods. Naive methods, I'll explain that, but those are just simple methods that you could have done in Excel for free almost. Similarly, if you're going to bother your people to provide human input or what we call collaborative forecast, then it should add value over machine-generated statistical forecast, because if you have already bought the computer program and it's generating and giving you a level of accuracy, getting input from the people will waste, or at least will extract some amount of time from them, and there should be return for that. So it should add value. Now, since we are talking, this webinar is about improving forecast accuracy. We are focused on that, but just to be clear, there are other ways value can be added. It's not increasing forecast accuracy is not the only way in which one can add value in this process. All right. So if the idea of FVA is to make sure your forecast adds value on top of the naive methods, then the one question is, what is a naive method or simple method? So naive methods are generally defined as they are easy to calculate. They can be easily done in spreadsheets by anyone. They are easy to explain and therefore easy to understand. So I can just tell you that a 3-period average, and I can just very quickly show you how that is calculated. And I think most people will probably have already done it, or certainly it's not a difficult concept to grasp. And what is really the killer is that it is notoriously difficult to beat. That means that a naive method typically will do better, or very often I should say, will do better than a lot of very sophisticated methods. And so Mike's point in FVA is that make sure you have a naive method and you at least try to beat it by a few percent points. So the role of forecasting should be to improve the forecast over and above the naive forecast. Otherwise, why would you bother? And so here I present a quick case study. I think an 8th grade student, this is from a book by Nate Silver. An 8th grade student was trying to forecast whether or not it was going to rain the next day in Kansas City. And so the student used a very simple, naive method, which was, if it rained today, then my forecast is that it will rain tomorrow. And if it did not rain today, then my forecast is that it will not rain tomorrow. So this is what we call same as last period, or random walk, or 1-period average. Many people will define it in very different ways, but as you can see, this is a very simple method. Whatever happened today is the forecast for tomorrow. There is no attempt here to forecast the amount of rain. We are simply forecasting a yes/no, whether it will rain tomorrow or whether it will not. Now, so this student documented their own forecast, and side by side they documented the forecast from the weather stations in the area, weather TV stations in the area, the weather uh, teams on those TV stations. They were telling or forecasting whether or not it was going to rain the next day. And then, of course, they compared at the end of the year and found out that the naive method, the simple method, actually had won out by 1% point. They were better than what the TV stations were saying. And the TV stations, of course, had the computer programs from the National Weather Service in the back pocket. They were using their forecast and then maybe tweaking it a little bit, but they were certainly using that forecast. So there was a classic example where a naive method, actually a simple method of forecasting from an 8th grade student, did beat probably a multi-million dollar computer system. Okay, so now let's introduce this idea of the floor or the ceiling. So depending on your frame of reference, the naive method can either be a floor or a ceiling. If you think in terms of accuracy, then the naive methods provide you a floor, and what your aim is to be better from there. So your aim is to improve from there. By contrast, if you think in terms of error, then the level of error of naive methods is a ceiling, and your attempt now is to reduce it from there. So either you can think in terms of floor or ceiling, depending on whether you think in accuracy or error. Here are some examples of naive forecast methods. So same as last period, which by the way, incidentally, is what the kid used in Kansas City. And so this is sometimes also called the random walk method. Same period last year. So forecast for April of this year is equal to whatever happened in April of 2023. And so that's called a seasonal random walk. Again, a very simple method. You can easily program that in Excel. A 3-period average would mean that forecast for April is the average of whatever happened in January, February, and March. Very easy. And 12-period average similarly would be forecast of April would be the average of what happened from April of 2023 to March of 2024. Now, these are all simple methods. You can easily do them in Excel. And of course, you can take some kind of average or weighted average of these methods to come up with a slightly more advanced naive method. But all of these methods are very easy to calculate, very easy to explain, and therefore fit the category of naive methods. Okay, so if this is the base, and from here we want to measure the improvement, one thing I want to establish is how to calculate the percent improvement. And my suggestion is to do that based on forecast error. So let's say if you already know the error, well, then you know it. If you are calculating the accuracy, then forecast error is 100% minus the forecast accuracy percentage. And so say if your naive forecast accuracy is 60%, then the error is 40%. And if one could reduce the error to 35%, then the improvement would be 5 divided by 40, and that would be 12.5% improvement. So that's the formula I would like you to use when measuring the percent improvement coming from all these processes. Okay, this gets us to our first polling question. And so Kristen will open the polls here, but the question is, how do you forecast in your business? Do you do a back of the envelope kind of calculation? Do you use Microsoft Excel? Do you have a software package? Maybe you don't forecast at all. So let's give it about a minute and see how you vote. Polls are open. It'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see how it pans out. I think a lot of companies still use Excel. I've discussed this with Gartner, and they say 60 to 70% of the companies still use Excel, not necessarily for forecasting, but for supply chain planning. So let's see what it tells us about forecasting in particular. So far, software package is in the lead. Very good. So I think we can go ahead and close the poll. So 70% of you voted that you use software package. That's very good. Actually, it's higher than my past webinars when I have asked this question in a poll, and only 30% use MS Excel. And very nicely, no votes on back of the envelope or we do not forecast. So this actually is very pleasing to me. Great, thank you for voting. So now let's let's talk about the journey to forecast accuracy improvement. And I'd like to establish two things up front. It's kind of a before you begin statement. So first of all, you need to know the purpose with which you are forecasting. Are you forecasting to plan your production, which then would guide your actions in a particular way? Are you forecasting to procure raw materials, which is then going to guide it in a different way? Are you forecasting to promise against orders? Make sure you have enough product to promise against orders. Well, then that would mean that you would forecast it in a different way. So depending on your purpose, the level at which you forecast, level of the hierarchy at which you forecast, and the lag at which you should measure the forecast accuracy is very important. The other thing to keep in mind is you must decide up front what is your accuracy measure that you're going to use when you're going to compare forecast results. Now, I've listed two common ones, MAPE, which is mean absolute percent error, and WMAPE, which is the weighted mean absolute percent error. I'm not saying these are the only two you should use. Maybe you have a slightly different version, but important to know that to note which one you will use and make sure everyone understands that that's the formula you're going to use to compare the methods. Now, from a Arkiva and certainly my experience perspective, when it comes to comparing the forecast, I recommend WMAPE. WMAPE is basically weighted mean absolute percent error, so it puts appropriate weight on high volume items. And in fact, a volume weighted MAPE is a very simple formula. By the time you do all the math and cross out all the terms, it comes to a very simple sum of absolute errors divided by sum of actuals. So if you have 10 items, you can calculate the absolute error on each of those items, add them all up. So now you have a sum of absolute errors. And then if you divide by the sum of actuals of those same 10 items, you get a WMAPE, which is a very simple formula. All right. Now we'll begin with the steps that you can take to improve the forecast accuracy. And the very first step is cleaning the history. And what do we mean by that? So here's an example. Remove the negatives. Now, what happens in many businesses is you ship a product to a customer, and sometimes there will be returns. When the return happens, which can be, by the way, the next week, it can be 2 to 3 months later, who knows? When that return happens, maybe it's recorded in the ERP as a negative shipment, because it is a negative shipment, it's product coming back to you. However, and by the way, that's important from an accounting perspective, because you do want to give that customer a discount, or for not exactly a discount, a refund for that amount. But let's think about it from a forecasting perspective. If we are forecasting, we need to forecast how much product we will need. Now, a month ago or 2 weeks ago or 2 or 3 months ago, depending on whenever the outbound shipment happened, I needed that product. The fact that this product is now returning to me, maybe in some damaged form, and I don't know, maybe we cannot sell it to anybody else because now the package has been opened, or whatever the case might be. So this return does not eliminate the need for us to ship out the product when the demand was first raised. Therefore, we should not allow the outbound forecast to be reduced by the returns. And so what I recommend is that certainly take a very hard look at your negatives, your returns, and remove that. And typically, depending on the business, of course, but in CPG industry in particular, this can have a 0.5 percentage point impact on the forecast accuracy. Then you would want to consider outlier removal. So let me explain this via some examples as well. So I'm sure many of you will remember in March 2021, the Suez Canal was blocked because a container ship the Ever Given kind of got stuck, and then for about 6-7 days, no traffic could move through this very important artery for the business. So a lot of companies had product not showing up. There was a lot of delays, and shipping companies had to really juggle the decision, of whether or not to send their ships southwards around the Cape in Africa, which would have added significant travel time. Of course, 6-7 days later, they resolved it, and the shipment resumed. But That impact, the result of that event is probably a one-time event. And if you saw a significant dip in what you gave to your customers in that month, maybe that's an outlier and you should really take it out before forecasting. Similarly, in November 2009, the government of India banned a lot of currency notes, something called as demonetization. And it took about 2 months for the economy to again normalize. So significant downwards demand trend was seen in those 2 months. Now, is that an outlier? And should you be then correcting your history for that? Similarly, last about 2 years, 21, 22, 2021, 2022, we had COVID, and COVID obviously impacted the demand for certain products and supply for certain products in very peculiar ways. So what happened in there, is it normal business or is this an anomaly? And if an anomaly, maybe we should consider removing the outlier. So when someone does this in a very thoughtful manner, it can have impact, significant impact, up to half to a percent point accuracy improvement can come from outlier removal. Now, this is an important concept. It's certainly important for forecast accuracy, but please do not use this as a license to go ahead and take out any forecast that is more than 3 standard deviations out because, well, that's one way to measure the outlier. No. You got to tie it to certain events and really establish that these are outliers that will never happen again. If it is simply a case of your business going up and down, then removing that as outliers is going to actually hurt the forecast, the performance of forecast accuracy. So let's use this sparingly. The next item I want to talk about is realignment, or certainly as we call it, realignment. So let me explain this. Let's say you used to sell product X and now you've changed its formulation and now you're selling product Y, which is more or less the same as product X, but because its formulation is different, in your ERP system, it has gotten a new name. And so now product Y has no history, product X has a lot of history. Product X is no longer being sold because, well, you're not making it. Product Y is the only one being sold. Now, in this case, how do you forecast product Y? Well, the way you do it is you align the history of product X to be used as the basis for the forecast for product Y. So this type of an example can happen with products. It can happen when a customer acquires another customer. So if customer A acquired B, well, now customer B is no longer called customer B. Now they are called customer A. You may have to do some alignment of the data there. Maybe a customer used to buy in drums, but now they have decided to buy in bulk. So all the history with respect to what you ship to them in drums, all that volume needs to now be used as history for forecasting the bulk. Similarly, sometimes you will have one-offs where the customer has always bought in drums, but there were periods when you did not have the drum inventory available. So 1 or 2 months here and there, you have shipped them in cans. Well, now you may want to then align those 1 or 2 months to convert them to drums before doing the forecasting. Otherwise, you will just have a zero in those months in terms of history, which will really skew your forecast. Implied in all this is also that it's important to forecast in the base unit of measure, especially if your business is a lot about dealing with packages. All right. So realignments will really help improve the accuracy. I have seen 1 to 2% improvement coming out from realignments. Next, we'll talk about time period considerations. So in time periods, all forecasting requires dealing with time buckets, and the time buckets should be big enough that you don't get lost in the noise in shipment history. So if you have day by day, if you look at things day by day, you will have a lot of noise in your data. If you look at weekly buckets, maybe you should have a lot less noise. If you look at monthly buckets, you should have even less noise. So the time buckets should be big enough that you get some kind of forecastable patterns At the same time, it should be actionable enough that you can derive some value out of it. So if you are a CPG company that really needs weekly forecast because that's the way your business operates, then you better make sure you're doing the forecast in weekly buckets. Related to this is this idea of calendar considerations. So a lot of companies will have 24/7 type of business, but then many will have what we call a only weekday business, where they will ship to companies, their own customers, only Monday through Friday. Or some companies will manage their forecasting in what is called a 4-4-5 or 5-4-4 calendar. The idea is that they have artificial constructs of months. When I say artificial, all I mean is that they are different from the calendar months. And the idea is that the first month is always 5 weeks or 4 weeks if it is 4-4-5, and 5 weeks if it is 5-4-4, and then the other two are always 4 weeks. So in that case, if you look at the history in those buckets, you will have an artificial seasonality in your data. So how do you deal with that? Well, you divide your history months by, depending on the example. Let's say if it's the first example where you are only shipping on work days, then you divide the history by the count of work days. This will give you a normalized history. You run the stat forecast on this normalized history to get a normalized forecast. And then you multiply the normalized forecast by the number of work days back to get the final forecast. Similarly, if you had a 4-4-5 calendar, very similar sequence, you would take the history and divide by the number of weeks. That will give you a normalized history. Then you run the stat forecast on that. That will give you a normalized forecast. And then, of course, you can multiply the normalized forecast by the number of weeks to get the final forecast. So if you have these types of situations in your data, ignoring that can make your forecast 0.5 to 1% worse. Or in other words, if we flip it around, taking account of this type of information can improve the accuracy results by 0.5 to 1%. Okay, now we'll talk about finding the right level of hierarchy at which to forecast. So we already kind of quickly discussed the time level, where we said time buckets should be appropriately sized. Here we are talking about level of aggregation as it pertains to customers and products. So this should always be at a level which is it should be meaningful to those who need to provide input into the process. So if I'm a salesperson and I'm providing input, then I need to have this available to the right level that it makes sense to me, as well as to those who evaluate the accuracy. So if I'm evaluating the accuracy at the product line level or major market level or individual SKU level, my forecast should be available to me at those levels, depending on my use. Now, the general rule of thumb, and a point I'll make again in a little bit, is that the higher the level of aggregation, the more accurate the forecast. So ultimately, we want to get to the level needed for the business and the business need, which can be, for example, manufacturing. So if I want to make a decision about what to make, do I have to make it at the product level? Do I have to make it at the product package level? And so if I have, depending on what I need to do, then the level of aggregation should really support that. So here are some examples of thinking through what is the proper level of aggregation in your business. This is not a full list, but you can certainly use this as a thought starter. So for example, if the product you sell is customer specific, so if you sell to customer A, the product that goes out there, while at some chemical level might be the same, it really is a different product, well, compared to customer B, then you may have no choice but to forecast at the product customer level. If your products are very bulky, they are maybe poisonous, environmentally sensitive, they might be perishable. In all these cases, you may want to make the product close to the customer. So if your proximity dictates where they should be made, or in other cases when logistic costs are very high, but in all those cases, product location level might be the most appropriate level. If, on the other hand, your logistic costs are outweighed by manufacturing costs, and the focus is on really optimizing the use of all production facilities and minimizing the manufacturing costs, then you don't want to worry about the location. You want to just forecast at the product level. So when we say manufacturing cost, this includes everything. This includes labor, this includes raw materials, this includes whatever taxes at the manufacturing level and so on. On the other hand, if you are the type of company that practices postponement and does the final assembly at the very end, well, then there is no point in forecasting at the package level. Maybe the bulk or stored product level is all you need to do. So you do it at that level, and then the remaining you leave it to the execution people because they can handle it. So these are just some suggestions on how one can determine the right level of aggregation. Again, this can have up to a percent point improvement in forecast accuracy. All right, so how do we find these opportunities for aggregation so that we can find the right level of forecasting? Well, as I said earlier, higher the level of aggregation, the more accurate the forecast, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, it comes with a negative, and that negative is that it is less useful. So higher the aggregation is more accurate, but less useful. On the other hand, if it is at the ultimate level of detail, as detailed as possible, then it's very useful because I can almost support any business process from it, but at the same time, it's a lot less accurate. So that's kind of a paradox. As you go up the level of hierarchy, you can get more accurate or less accurate, but then of course, by contrast, you can get less useful or more useful. So the ideal point for a lot of businesses is somewhere in the middle. So how do we find the right hierarchies present in our data? Well, or actually right hierarchy for forecasting? Well, the first clue is in the data itself. A lot of companies will provide data, the ERP systems will have it, where there are already hierarchies present. So for example, there's a product hierarchy, which will be things like product package, might be followed by bulk product, might be followed by, if you're an SAP user, PH4, PH3, which is short names for product hierarchy 4, product hierarchy 3, with their own unique meaning for individual businesses. The customers, they have their own hierarchy. Maybe a ship to is ship to is inside a sold to. Many ship tos are inside one sold to. Many sold tos are inside one bill to. Similarly, locations can be have a hierarchy of state and country and regions and so on. So one can take this information and then do a hierarchical pyramid forecasting where one forecasts at a low level and have a predetermined measurement level, the level at which we want to improve the forecast accuracy. So once we forecast at the low level, we measure the WMAP at the measurement level. Then we forecast at a higher level, disaggregate, measure the WMAP again at the measurement level, and see if that process of doing a secondary step improved the accuracy or made it worse. And if it improved it, then we keep it. So in this way, through an iterative process, one can find the best pyramid that improves the accuracy at the measurement level. Let me show you a couple of examples of that. So here in a CPG company based in the US, basically we had used a machine learning technique to run a lot of the permutations on the finding the right pyramid. And what we found was that when we did it at the low level, the product ship to level, the error measure was 12%, accuracy was 88%, and we were forecasting 2,800 or so combinations. But then when we followed it up with a second level forecast and disaggregating it, and again, remember, we are not cheating. We are measuring it always at the measurement level, which is predetermined, the level at which we want to improve the accuracy. So when we did that, when we forecasted at the product level, did the disaggregation, and then we again calculated the accuracy, we saw that there was a 3% drop in the error or 3% increase in the accuracy. So adding that second step in the hierarchy really improved the forecast for this business, where they were already at a pretty good place to begin with, 88%. Now they were at 91%. Here's another example. This is a pipe manufacturer based in US. For them, the level 1 had a lot of attributes: product, origin, customer, delivery, customer type. And in that case, the error measure was 48%. That's how they came to us, and they had 15,000 combinations at that level. Well, when we ran our analysis using machine learning to find out the best possible hierarchy for them, we found that if we add two more levels, level 2 being product, origin, and customer type, we improved the error from 48%, it dropped to 35%, accuracy went up to 65%. And then we did the third level, the product to origin state, we dropped it further. The error went to 32%, which meant that the accuracy went up to 68%. Again, let me say it one more time. No cheating here. We are always measuring the accuracy at the predetermined measurement level, because it's important to say that, because we are not, for example, just forecasting at a high level and measuring the accuracy at that high level. That obviously will be a lot better. That's not the point. The point is always to improve the accuracy at the measurement level. So this type of hierarchy pyramids, to the extent you have that in your data, doing some experimentation is going to yield up to 5 to 8% improvement in accuracy depending on your data. Certainly with Archiva, we use a machine learning based tool, but even if you don't have that, don't be shy in experimenting and trying to see if particular hierarchies help you out. So now those were examples of hierarchies that were present in the data, but sometimes you have to look at your own data and try to figure out, hey, can I derive certain hierarchies? So I'll give you an example. I was working with some business and they were selling basically the same product in 1 liter pouch, but those pouches had different SKU names because they had different colors, they had different labels because they were going to different customers. And so after struggling with the forecast accuracy, we consolidated to the bulk product because, you know, in some conversation, it got clear that all these packages were same size and the same product, same underlying product, only the package was different. So when we did that, the blue line was the starting forecast accuracy. And when we consolidated to the bulk product, utilizing the business knowledge that we gained from talking to the business users, we improved the forecast accuracy all the way up to this orange line. Now notice that the shape is not very different. I mean, if there's a dip in this period, maybe there was not enough, something going on, some outlier event. Well, there's a dip in orange line as well. So the shape is not fundamentally different, but the accuracy did improve by 5, 6, 7, 8% points. So sometimes it's helpful to really think back what derived hierarchies can be available to you inside your business as well. Another example of this, before I move off of this slide, we had a customer where they had 6 or 7 ship to locations for a particular customer, and those locations were all in Houston. And once we had a chat with them, what we realized was this was a large facility of the customer, and depending on the gate at which you drop the product, you had a different ship to location. So after some discussion, we convinced them to combine those different ship tos to one. So it was another example of a derived hierarchy. And when we did that, we saw a significant uptick in the forecast accuracy. All right. Now let's talk a little bit more about certain steps you can take. So first is ignore or downplay the unforecastable combinations. You may have data series where there's only 1 or 2 data points. You know, you have stopped selling it, it's a dead item, extremely high COV. So COV of 3 or more, in fact, even 1.5 or more is generally considered unforecastable. But what if you have COV of 3, 5, 7, 10? I mean, my goodness. So extreme unforecastable combinations, either try not to measure accuracy against them or at least measure them separately so that you're quite clear that, hey, these are difficult items and therefore we are reporting on them in a separate bucket. The next thing is suspending the pattern identifier. All of us people who are involved in the world of forecasting, as soon as we look at a graph, we go, oh, that looks seasonal to me, or that looks, you know, that it does something every March. And that's fantastic. All of us humans we have evolved to be good at looking at patterns and quickly understanding them. But it's best to leave that to faces and voice patterns and so on. And as far as forecasting is concerned, do that to a minimum. Instead, let the statistical engine evaluate those patterns. Because what we have seen is that a lot of second guessing, I'm not saying don't do it at all, but a lot of second guessing of the output of statistical engine actually can take out 4 to 5% accuracy out of the system. So try your best to suspend the pattern identifier in you. It'll be tough, but try. Then, of course, put the technology to work. 70% of you voted in the first poll that you use a statistical forecasting package, which is great. And hopefully this package is able to determine the right method, the right parameters for those methods, as well as the right level at which to forecast. So use the forecasting methods, use the package, use the capabilities of the statistical forecasting packages to the max. And then maybe, just maybe, you may want to look for causal factors that can drive your business. So the statistical methods mentioned in the previous slide, they are all time series. They are pattern based. You're trying to see if there is a seasonal pattern and you try to project that out into the future. But there are certain businesses where they react to the economy, or they maybe react to the oil prices, or maybe they react to mortgage rates, or they maybe react to housing starts, or maybe where there is a war going on and that has an impact. So using these external factors and using methods that are particularly suited for using these external factors can also improve your forecast accuracy. Depending on the business, this can be 2 to 5% improvement as well. And then, of course, we have to think about tapping into the business knowledge of our people. It's very important. So let's do a second poll here. If you use your human forecasters, people who are in the business, and ask them to add on top of the computer-generated forecast, what's the impact you see? Do they make it worse? Do they improve it by 0 to 5, or 5 to 10, or 10 to 15%, or do they improve it by more than 15%? So let's see. I see that about almost 60% are saying that they did improve by 0 to 5%. And not surprisingly, 24% are saying that they actually make it worse, which is something I hear in a lot of these polls. Okay, all right, so a lot of you do get value. 18% actually say it's 5 to 10%, so that's very nice. And again, not unsurprisingly, no one has gone for 10 to 15 or more than 15, because those are just very high values, and I would have found it difficult to believe. Anyways, so what is collaborative forecasting? Well, it's the process to collect and reconcile information from diverse sources inside and outside the company. And humans can provide significant improvement in forecast accuracy over any kind of computer-generated forecast. Simple reason is because we can see what's going on. We have the pulse of the market. We are the ones who are talking to the customers. We know that they are taking a shutdown in their plant. We just have information that the system does not, and that can, at least in the short term, have a significant impact. So we want to do that, but of course, like anything else, we want to have our do's and don'ts. So here are some rules of thumb. Do not adjust too many combinations. It has been researched and reported by Robert Fildis and Paul Goodwin that companies just adjust too many combinations. Up to 75% combinations are adjusted each period, which is maybe 60% of them are superfluous. Only 15% should be adjusted, and even that, it seems very high to me. A lot of these adjustments are small and very small, and they typically add no value to the process. So avoid small and very small adjustments would be another suggestion. And in particular, whenever humans are involved, the optimistic adjustments need to be watched out for. They seem to actually have a negative impact on forecast accuracy a lot more than the negative ones. The negative ones typically are only done when we have some very peculiar, very particular information, and therefore they seem to actually improve the forecast accuracy. So if you look at this in a graphic form, you can see that we have taken the forecast and divided it into 4 quartiles based on sizes. So the smallest forecast overrides, quartile 1 and quartile 2, where my mouse is making a circle, is basically not adding a whole lot of accuracy. Quartile 3 and quartile 4 are, but even there, the difference from positive to negative is very significant. The negative overrides actually add a lot more value. So how do you use this? You can actually tell your human forecasters, hey, I want your input, and I want you to maybe give me only the negative inputs. Now that might be difficult to sell. So you might say, give me, if as long as you give me all your negative inputs, I'm happy, but certainly give me any positive inputs on top of that as well. Another thing to do, and one of my customers, they used to do this, is they used to limit the number of overrides. They said, only give me 20 overrides. So really think where the biggest, most significant chunk of information that you have, and only provide me the forecast overrides there, because that really helped improve the accuracy as well. So avoid too many and avoid the positive overrides as you can. All right, so that gets us now to the final slide, which is the conclusion. The main thing I would like you to take away from this webinar is that really focus on the data, try to do the cleanup that I described, because the garbage in, garbage out always applies in forecasting, because forecasting is a data-driven science. Then use your naive methods as your floor or ceiling, or as a kind of a base, if you will. Then use a good package which provides you access to statistical or AI, ML-based methods or causal methods, and then use human input sparingly to your advantage and try to fine-tune your forecast and improve the accuracy. But again, most importantly, focus on your data before beginning the journey of your forecast accuracy improvement. So with that, we will conclude. And I don't know if there are any questions.
Great, thank you, Sujit. Before we launch into the Q&A, just a quick note that if you would like a personalized product demonstration on how Arqiva can help you achieve a better planning process, please visit our website, which is www.arqiva.com, and click on the Get a Demo button in the top right corner. There will also be a survey that pops up at the end of the webinar, and one of the options in that survey is to indicate if you'd be interested in a demo as well. Okay, now we will go into the Q&A session. We do have a few minutes left, so that's great. A couple questions have already started to come in, and as a reminder, you can submit any questions you may have during the, using the questions window. Okay, let's see. Our first question is about data cleanup. It says, you emphasize data cleanup. What % of improvements are predicted on data work, and what % is on the best software package?
As a company that makes and sells the forecasting software, I should be careful in how I answer this question, but generally I would put a lot more weight on the data cleanup. No amount of or no quality of forecasting method can take bad data and do good forecast on it. So I would say up to 60-70% is on data, and 20-30% is on the software.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another one that we have is, when it's all said and done, what is the maximum accuracy improvement you have seen being achieved?
Like I said, forecasting is very, very data driven, and data in one type of business is very different from data in the other type of business. Also, forecast accuracy, if I may use this analogy, is like extracting juice out of a fruit. Certain fruits are just well suited for juice, versus other fruits are not juicy at all. What do I mean by that? That means that if your business data is fundamentally lumpy, bumpy, high COV, the accuracy you can derive from that might be limited to 40%, whereas someone else who sells oil-based products day in and day out, every month, about the same amount, I mean, they can even think of achieving in the 90s. So it can really be different. So when I say the highest number, I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting any company can achieve that. In the right circumstances, I have had, for example, businesses where we achieved 93%, 94% accuracy forecast accuracy. Probably a norm is in the 70 to 75 to 80% range. But again, very data driven.
Okay, great, thank you. That actually, I think, answers a similar question that came in regarding what you consider to be a good forecast accuracy. And I think what we heard there is that it depends and it can vary.
Right. And I think whoever asked that question, they should ask themselves good forecast accuracy in their type of business, because like I said, it's very different from business to business. Now, having said that, I do want to say that ultimately forecast journey is about improving. So one way to think about it is it as good as it can be? But the other way to think about it is it better than last month? So if last month was 62% accuracy and this month is 65%, I don't know if it's theoretically the best or not, but I made a dent. And practitioners should always, forecasting practitioners in particular, should always think like that. They're not in terms of absolute terms, but in relative terms, and they can always compete with themselves as they were last month or last period, as the case might be.
That's great. I like that point that a big part of forecast accuracy is just making an improvement. Okay, it looks like those are all the questions that we have received so far today. If you think of anything after the webinar, please feel free to send us an email and we'll get responses back to you. We hope that you'll join us for our next live webinar, which will be on Wednesday, April 24th, presented by Dr. Vicki Meckler, and the topic will be the latest R in sustainability, reshoring. We'll have registration and more information available for that session soon, so keep an eye out for that. As a reminder, please take the short survey that will pop up at the end of the session, and have a good rest of your week.